Transcendent. Exceeding usual limits, extending or lying beyond the limits of ordinary experience, being beyond comprehension. This term is sometimes used to describe the best of the best athletes. Those who are iconic enough to be known by just one name, those great enough to be remembered generations after their playing days are over, those whose stories are told time and time again and are always considered when the greatest of all time lists are made. But what if that transcendency happened in a forgotten league pushed to the margins of society? What if that home on the edges meant that your statistics were erased or never recorded in the first place? What if, despite a fellow player calling you, quote, a better power hitter than Babe Ruth, Ted Williams, or anybody else I've ever seen, end quote, you never got to prove yourself against them? Well, in that case, instead of being transcendent, you get to wait 25 years after your death to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. This is what you don't know about Josh Gibson. Welcome to What You Don't Know About Sports, where we delve into the forgotten stories, teams, and athletes of sports history and question widely held takes on today's sports. I'm Blake, and this is Matt.
What's up, guys?
And today we want to tell the story of a forgotten Negro League baseball player, possibly the greatest power hitter of all time, Josh Gibson. Now, many of you may not know who Josh Gibson is unless you're a diehard baseball fan, and that's for many different reasons, and we'll get into those. But first, I want to ask you, who are your favorite baseball players of all time?
For me, as a Yankees fan, I'm kind of contractually obligated to respond with like Babe Ruth and Mickey Mantle and Joe DiMaggio and Lou Gehrig and all of the greats. And then in modern times, it would be like Mariano Rivera. Growing up, Derek Jeter was always someone to look up to. But in all honesty, just because I watched it as a kid and I watched this person play, I think it's not a Yankee. It's Ken Griffey Jr. for me. He was always the one that everybody wanted to be, and you wanted to model your swing like him. I think even as us as kids, even in that home run race with McGwire and Sosa in 98, Griffey was a part of that too. And I think most of us were pulling for Griffey over the other two until it was clear that he wasn't going to break the record. So for me, Ken Griffey Jr., and then as like an old timer, like Babe Ruth, maybe Willie Mays, somebody like that.
I like that. I was not ready for you to say Ken Griffey Jr., for being honest.
I caught you on your toes. See, you thought it was going to be Jeter.
I was ready for the Derek Jeter speech because he's the captain and that's your team.
Oh, captain, my captain.
But so that and I like that home run race because, like you said, Ken Griffey was part of it, but once he was out of it, like people just forgot, and even like the history books today don't really talk about him in that specific home run race. It was just McGwire and Sosa. Like there's books about McGwire and Sosa's home run race that year, and Griffey Jr.'s never mentioned, but he was there. Mm-hmm. Now, speaking of your favorite players, here's another question. Why? Okay, so before that, when the general public, if you were to ask the general public who their favorite players were, who their favorite baseball players of all time were, do you think it would be similar to your list?
Yeah, I think depending on who they were a fan of and where they grew up and when they grew up, the list would be similar, and you would replace Ken Griffey Jr. and Derek Jeter and Mariano Rivera with their growing up generation of players. But I think it would be, for most people, relatively similar with those exceptions. Yeah.
So can we say with pretty high confidence that if you asked the general baseball fan who their favorite players were, they would only mention players who played in Major League Baseball?
I think that's fair to say, yeah.
Why is that?
So that's where it gets tricky, right? Because we know culturally baseball people are aware of the Negro Leagues and it's very rooted in like baseball culture that was a thing, and it was a thing that was great for its purpose. Obviously, its purpose was rooted in terribleness, right? That we have a segregated society. But people are aware of it. And for whatever reason, those players don't get listed. And it's not necessarily for whatever reason, right? There's logical reasons behind it, that those leagues were pushed to the margins of society. They were on the edges of the world, like you said in the introduction. So newspaper records of their games were not being published in the same newspapers as Major League Baseball games, or as widely published as a wire report for a Major League Baseball game. The teams were not as widely spread, and the leagues themselves, because it was a marginalized thing, the leagues weren't as successful. So their promotion of what was going on, their record keeping, because leagues and teams would fold and come and go, all of that plays a role in why some of these players aren't given the due they should. And that's before you get to some of the more, I guess, sinister reasons why they don't get their due, which, as a society, we're still coming to terms with. So there's the two-faced answer, I guess.
Right. And there were, like you mentioned, there were multiple different Negro Leagues. There wasn't just one, because they weren't very widely followed. They weren't greatly covered for financing reasons, interest reasons, segregation reasons. There just wasn't a lot of support there like there was for the major leagues. So we're only going to tell you mostly about one great Negro Leagues baseball player, but I would implore you to just take a look around. If you're a true baseball fan, you have to know who these people are. You can't forget that those players existed, like Major League Baseball and the Hall of Fame did. Okay? We're going to get into those stories too.
Spoiler alert for the end, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to get into that and talk about that a little more, but just throw that out there. So, because of all of these reasons as to why the Negro League wasn't greatly covered, and there were so many of them and all of this stuff, naturally, statistics of the game, scores, hits, home runs, stolen base, all the statistics you would keep in a baseball game today, well, not all of them. Like, I don't think they had a war back in 1940, but most
you could calculate it from what they had. Yeah.
You could calculate it if the statistics were kept, right?
Right.
So, but they weren't. That's just the fact. And we're going to, again, similar to our marathon episode 2, go back and listen if you haven't. A lot of this is based on the reporting of the times. A lot of this story, we have to rely on the information that we can get our hands on, right? And if that information isn't completely accurate, if it isn't full, and if it's at some point controversial or competing with another report from the exact same time, we're just going to have to deal with that. We're going to give you the best story that we can, okay? So bear with us.
I'm going to jump in to back you up on that, because we talked about this in the marathon episode too. This is a time of newspaper writing where we like to think like newspaper writers were always upstanding, fine young men and women who gave us unbiased opinions on everything. And it's not true, especially in the time we're talking about right here. This is peak sensationalized news, especially on, the edges of society, like rural North Carolina, for instance, would be in this even here. But yeah, like stories would get passed from town to town as truth. I think there's like some alien airship story that went through the country at one point. So yeah, this is not an exact science with things that were not super popular. It's kind of like what people imagine Wikipedia to be now, is going back in time and trying to find things from the 20s and 30s. It's just iffy sometimes.
Yeah. So in our research, we found multiple competing ideas and different numbers, different statistics, because people kept numbers then. They went back and tried to calculate numbers in recent history, and so there's a little bit of clash there, but we're going to get through it. It's a great story either way. So, Josh Gibson, he was born December 21st, 1911, in a town called Buena Vista, Georgia. I had never heard of it, had to look it up. It's about 2 hours south of Atlanta. Shout out. Parents' names were Mark and Nancy Gibson. They were sharecroppers. They worked as sharecroppers in southern Georgia for most of his early life. And if you were like me and you've never heard of Buena Vista, in the 1910 census, the population was just over 1,000 people. So we're talking like really small, rural, southern Georgia town. Actually, during my research, I found a somewhat modern photograph of a water tower in Buena Vista that actually says Josh Gibson, painted in big letters on the top on the tower. Thought that was pretty cool.
Julius Peppers doesn't even get that in Bailey, man. Josh Gibson is the man of Buena Vista. All right, let's go.
I bet we could make some calls and get Pepper's name plastered somewhere if you're down.
Should be.
Anyway, father moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1921. So when Josh was about 10 years old, he moved up there for work. He eventually saved up enough money. It took him about 2 years. He worked up there in Pittsburgh and saved enough money to move his family up there in 1923. Josh's education ended after 9th grade, at what point he enrolled in a vocational school to become an electrician. He wanted to get to work, another sign of the times. He just quit school, wanted to get to work, studied to become an electrician. He didn't finish. He never finished his vocational school studies there. So at age 16, he went to work at a steel mill. He was introduced to organized baseball around this time. Apparently, he didn't stay at the steel mill very long because he joined an amateur baseball club sponsored by the Gimbel's department store while he was working there as an elevator operator. So that's how he originally got his start in baseball.
That's not a super rare thing for that time. It would have been on the back end of when that would have been popular. But especially semi-pro teams being sponsored, or amateur in this case, being sponsored by a department store to get their name out there. But it generally sometimes would have been people that played or that worked at the department store that would be playing for the team. So
and also that's still a thing today too in Little League. Not like legit Little League, yeah, but if you've ever played like small town baseball or any baseball for that matter, and like your coach owns a small business, that's the name on the front of your t-shirt, right? So when I was growing up playing baseball, we always had Home Plate, which is a restaurant. It was a Home Plate restaurant in Durham, would always sponsor all the baseball teams. And you go in there and of course, like all of our photos are like plastered around the walls and stuff. So,
I'll do you one better. I played for Hardee's one time.
Hardee's, like getting the Hardee's in Bailey sponsored.
Yeah, just the one in Bailey. But I played for Hardee's. Got a big old orange hat with an H on it, and it was great.
That's beautiful. So while playing for the Gimbel's Department Store Amateur Baseball Club, or Gimbel's AC, he caught the eye of a couple folks from the semi-pro team, the Pittsburgh Crawfords, Harold Tinker and Gus Greenlee, who were part of that organization at the time. The Pittsburgh Crawfords also, at the time, were also known as the Crawford Colored Giants. And in 1930-ish, he started playing for them. Around the same time, he was only 17 years old. He married his girlfriend shortly after joining the Crawfords. Her name was Helen, and she became pregnant very shortly after they got married. In the summer of 1930, Gibson was recruited by Cumberland Posey, who was the owner of the Homestead Grays at the time, another local Pittsburgh team, preeminent Negro League team. He debuted for the team at some point in July. So this is an interesting story. he wasn't playing right away, but the starting catcher for the Grays, Buck Ewing, was apparently injured during the game at some point. And as the story goes, Gibson was watching the game in the stands. And when Ewing was injured, he was asked to come and play. So he jumped into the middle of this game to replace the injured catcher. And so it began.
And so it goes.
Yep.
And like, I find it interesting that the debut date is not clear, because if anybody was going to have perfect statistics, it would be the Homestead Grays. They would have been the Barcelona or
the premier team at the time in that realm. Yeah.
Like they are to the point where they were, I believe, when I was looking it up, they outdrew some Major League ball clubs during certain parts of their existence. Like they were a draw if nobody else was. So it's interesting that they don't have that date nailed down, I guess.
Yeah, the dates I found were July 25th or July 31st of 1930. So if anyone knows, holler. Bit of unfortunate news. Just about 2 weeks after he premiered for the Grays, Gibson's wife Helen went into premature labor and died while giving birth to the twins Joshua Jr. and Helen. The children survived, but Helen passed away. The children were eventually raised by Helen's parents, because at this point Gibson was 18 and his baseball career was just taking off. I guess he figured, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but I guess he figured that the best thing, his baseball career was just getting started, and the best thing for him and his family at the time were for him to go play. So, on to the baseball. He played for the Homestead Grays the first go-round from 1930 to 1931. At this point, again, he's only a teenager. He's like 18, 19 years old at this point. He hit one of the longest home runs in the history of baseball. And this is legend. Nobody measured it. We didn't have the fancy arc drawing on the television when we watched it go over the wall. Like, none of this was happening, okay? Apparently, it traveled over 500 feet, as far as 580 feet. I believe this is the one that happened in the old Yankee Stadium.
Yep.
And it was just a few feet from leaving the stadium altogether.
Like it was, so I'm going to nerd out about the Yankees for a second. In the new stadium, they have this facade that goes around the entire stadium. But before they tore down the old one, that facade was only in a couple of places. But the original design had the same kind of facade fencing going around the whole stadium. And this ball hit that. Otherwise, it would have gone out of the entire stadium. So
imagine somebody today hitting a home run 580 feet.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure
if they didn't hit the upper deck, though, like if you think like say if a Barry Bonds on roids, quote unquote, hit a ball allegedly hit a ball and it didn't hit like the upper deck and it got to keep falling, how far would it have gone, like from point to point, you know?
Right. That's where you get some of these mammoth home runs. Like Mickey Mantle was supposed to have done the same thing, again, allegedly. But it didn't hit anything, so it went out. And so it, I guess, could go further. I'm trying to think of who did it. Maybe Cecil Field or somebody for the Tigers hit one out of old Tiger Stadium. Maybe Reggie Jackson. Somebody hit a ball that hit a transponder on a roof or something. So I don't know. But this is supposed to be eyewitness testimony that this happened. Like they watched it hit the facade of the stadium, which is incredible. I mean, it's just an incredible feat of strength.
Yeah. No matter who does it, right? Whether it's a 30-some-year-old roided home run king or an 18-year-old amateur, it doesn't matter who does it. It's pretty crazy. So after that season, after his debut season for the Grays, he was lured away with the promise of $100 per month to join the Pittsburgh Crawfords.
$100.
$100 a month. And if I did my math correctly using a non-specific inflation counter on the internet, that would equate to about $1,700 a month today.
So still not a lot, but
It doesn't sound, like 100. You think $100 100 years ago was decent money? $1,700 a month today isn't outstanding. I mean, it's not like Major League Baseball money by any means.
no, and that's fairly normal too, because these leagues aren't making the money they were making now. Some of these guys, even Major League Baseball or NFL players in the early days of the NFL were working second jobs in the offseason to make money because it just wasn't there. Which, again, we said the Negro Leagues, several leagues came and went because of finances, and there's an example of it.
Right. So he took that offer. He played for the Pittsburgh Crawfords from 1932 to 1936. He was crowned the batting champion of the league in 1936, his last year with Pittsburgh Crawfords. And then he left Pittsburgh to go play in the Dominican Republic for 1 year. Supposedly, Satchel Paige, another all-time great, left and went with him. So they played together on this Dominican team called the Trujillo Dragons. Only played down there for 1 year. Then he came back to the Grays. For 3 years. He won a second batting title in 1938. His team also won the league championship in 38 and in 39. So he's starting to ramp up. He's starting to get some awards, some recognition. He was always talked about in this, with this aura, I guess, even being as young as he was, for being the hitter. And he finally started winning these awards and championships with his teams and stuff. He left the Grays around 1940, and he went and played in Mexico for a year for the Veracruz Blues. Then came back to the Grays for the final time from 42 to 46. He won 2 more league batting titles in 1942 and 1945. And this is the time where he was given the name the Black Babe Ruth, because he led the Negro League that he played in home runs for 9 or 10 years, again, depending on who you asked. It is said that he hit between 800 and 1,000 home runs in his career, and I think his Hall of Fame statue actually says almost 800. So in the Baseball Hall of Fame, on his plaque, he is said to have hit, quote, almost 800 home runs in his career. Now, this is an interesting thing because that sounds like a lot. And it is.
Oh, yeah. It's a ton.
And it is.
Yeah.
But he may not have hit them all the way that you think he did. The majority of his home runs came against semi-professional and other non-league teams. It said that up to 2/3 of the games that he played in as a professional, semi-professional baseball player came against inferior competition. And this is due to barnstorming, which was popular back in the day, especially for the Negro League teams, because they didn't have the funding and all of that stuff that we've already talked about. So their leagues only played 50 to 60 games a season. Mm-hmm. Major League Baseball plays 180-something plus playoffs if you make it there. Just imagine only playing
162.
162. What did I say?
We play enough games. We don't need.
What did I say? I said 182.
I think you went 180. Yeah.
I said 182.
But you know what? Spring training games definitely 182.
See, I'm right. Told you.
Yeah.
So, it's important to distinguish between the difference, who we hit the home runs against, because of course it's going to be easier to hit a home run against a non-professional. Like if I stood up in front of him, he'd hit everyone 700 feet. I just don't have it.
Yeah, that's the toughest part, and that's also where some of these statistics get lost, as these games happen in random places like Wilson or Fayetteville or somewhere there's not somebody that's keeping track. And they don't have a reporter following them to those places necessarily. But like you said, Major League teams barnstormed too. They just did it less because they have more games. But yeah, that's a great way to make money if you if you don't have the following that you need locally, just go out and the fanciful sports writing that is going on, telling everybody how Josh Gibson can hit a ball 800 feet by the time it gets to whatever podunk town you're in. People show up to watch that and see if it can happen, and so that's how they made their money. But yeah, he's hitting against not the best pitchers he could be, and so it changes the perception. But that's still a ton of home runs. Like that's
regardless
nearly 1,000. Come on.
Yeah. So I found some numbers, and again, the accuracy of these can be questioned all you want. Whether he hit 800 or 1,000 doesn't matter. Like, he could hit the baseball. So some numbers I found. Against all levels of competition, Gibson hit 69 home runs in 1934 alone, but only 11 of those came in his league's games. They only played 52. So what's that? 11 out of 69. So very few came against what you could consider equal level competition, people playing in the same league as him. So take that for what you will, I guess. In 1933, he hit .467 batting average. He had 55 home runs against all competitions that year. And I did some digging just for funsies. The highest Major League Baseball single-season batting average in history, .4397.
So he's hitting 467, and the highest is 439.
Yeah.
And if I was to wager that 439 came from a completely different time period of baseball too, like not within a couple of years, but not the same generation of players, I don't think.
According to the Hall's official data, Gibson's lifetime batting average was .359. He would be second all-time in Major League history behind Ty Cobb, who hit .366 lifetime.
Yeah, which is already a impossibly high number. Yes, Hugh Duffy is the single season batting average leader, and that was 1894. So yeah, that was
this was 50 years before Gibson was playing. So completely different era.
That was the time of baseball where guys were just kind of lobbing the ball up there, and because you weren't hitting it out of the park, and it didn't matter where you hit it, the defense was going to back you up. So
right.
So that's different for him to have hit that well. We don't have college players hitting against college players that hit this well. Like
no, and with metal bats, yeah.
Yeah, like it's not as simple as he hit against lesser competition. Like it's still baseball. You're not going to go out there and hit everything out of the park or get on base routinely unless you're good. Those numbers are video game numbers. And
right.
Video game numbers don't happen in real life, even if you're playing against scrubs. So,
and you can ask even non-baseball players, what's the hardest thing in sports to do? Hit a baseball.
It's a round object with a round object.
Yeah. Like, how do you do that? How do you do that really, really well? You can ask non-baseball people that have never played baseball, who think that their sport might be the toughest. They're going to tell you hitting a baseball is the hardest thing in sports. So there was a special committee on the Negro Leagues who conducted some research well after Gibson's time, right? But they did some research to try and compile some better stats on him and everybody else that played at that time. But according to that special committee, he hit 224 home runs against top black teams. That was at 2,375 at-bats, approximately. So you're looking at a home run every 10 at-bats-ish.
Yeah.
Hit 2 home runs lifetime in 56 at-bats against white Major League pitchers, and hit 44 home runs in 450 at-bats in the Mexican League. So, again, take that for what you will. He could still hit a freaking baseball. Okay? So, John Holway, who is a baseball researcher and author, I think he wrote a book on Gibson, just on Gibson. He ranks him third all-time in the Negro Leagues among players with 2,000 at-bats. According to him, Gibson is also second in home runs for Negro League alone, I think is what he used, behind a gentleman named Mule Suttles. And he is also the all-time leader in home run per at-bat by a considerable margin. When I say considerable margin, he homered every 10.6 at-bats. The gentleman who who has the all-time Negro League's record in all-time home runs, he only hit a home run every 13.6. And just for reference, the Major League all-time leader in home run per at-bat is Mark McGwire with 10.61.
Yeah, 10.6 is prolific. I mean, that's...
A home run every 10 at-bats it's otherworldly.
And see, this is just Negro League statistics. So this is the home runs per at bat. That's where we get to exclude the ones he's hitting against the semi-pro and amateur teams and barnstorming around. Those are just what we can find from official statistics. So that's an incredible number. Or a home run every 10.6 at bats that's something to be like astonished by. McGwire did it, but McGwire did a lot of other things too, if you know what I'm saying.
Right.
So
Allegedly.
So that's different. I mean, like, we're talking about things that McGwire and Barry Bonds can do with modern science in all forms of the words. And we're talking about this dude was doing it in the 30s. That's ridiculous.
Unreal.
It's just ridiculous.
So during Gibson's last stint with the Grays, around 1942, he started breaking down a bit physically and mentally. He started going through some rough times. He was hospitalized at some point between 1943 and 1944. He suffered some sort of mental condition, and he was hospitalized. Also in early 1943, he fell into a coma, and he was later diagnosed with a brain tumor. It was at this point that he refused to have surgery to have it removed, and he just continued to play baseball. I mean, that was basically all he knew. He just continued to play baseball with the tumor, with the recurring headaches, everything that it came with, but he also took to alcohol, and he started drinking, quote, constantly. So excessive alcohol consumption, these mental breakdowns, his coma with his brain tumor and stuff, it had to be a lot. I can't even imagine. But he suffered a stroke January 20th, 1947, and died at the age of 35 years old.
Still plenty of time to live, number one, but still plenty of time to play baseball. But most importantly, I mean, 35 is young. I mean, too young for death.
He won the batting title in the league that he was playing in 1945. So just a season before, two seasons max before he passed, he won the batting title. He wasn't done. I mean, we could have a whole episode on why this could have happened and what could have led to it and all that stuff. And he's not the only notable athlete to pass away too early, right? Like there are plenty of examples of athletes who could have been all-time greats. Now, for your sake, the first one that came to my mind was Sean Taylor and his passing. It wasn't health related.
Yeah.
But I mean, what are some others?
Sean Taylor, I'm glad you said that. That wasn't in my head, but yeah, Sean Taylor would have been a big one. Just thinking about one of the episodes we did on David Thompson, we were talking about the greatest players in ACC basketball history. Len Bias is the top of a lot of people's lists that watched him play, and he's somebody that died before he could even play in the NBA due to some personal demons stemming from cocaine and such. Roberto Clemente, sticking with the baseball, he was doing some philanthropic, that's how you say the word, work, and the plane he was in crashed. Unfortunately, that whole Marshall football team in the 70s plane crash. Plenty of examples though of
Davey Allison in NASCAR.
Yeah, sure. There's a couple
his
of
plane went down, right?
Examples. Davey Allison helicopter, I think. But yeah, I mean, it's just it happens more than it should, and it seems to weigh more on people. I mean, I guess we'll do this later, but it weighs more on people when somebody like that dies, because we see them on TV and we make it They're part of our personal lives because we can just flip on the TV and they're there. So when that person has normal life things happen to them, it feels different.
Yeah, it's amazing how emotionally attached we can get to sports. I know you and me do it just because, and we're clearly not the only ones, but just this year, Kobe Bryant passing. I mean, he was done playing basketball, but like that shook a lot of people. I mean, people still think about it and get emotional. I can't imagine what his family are going through. And then of course, as of this time, the Lakers did win the NBA championship. So I guess I don't know if that's full circle or not. That's just a fact. So good on them for pulling it off in his honor. So,
but yeah, definitely for Gibson's case, there just was a lot on the table. You know, it's health related, nothing you can do about that, but it's still a kind of a tragic end to a story where this guy's probably one of the best hitters of all time. And not only does his life get cut short, but like selfishly, his career is cut short a little bit before he could have really been allowed to prove himself, fully.
Right. And he passed January 20th. Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball less than 3 months later. So just think about that timing.
Yeah.
It's hard to think about. So on to every athlete's post-playing days, especially one of this caliber. You would think that the greatest power hitter in Negro League history would be considered for the Baseball Hall of Fame at some point, right? He died in 1947.
Yeah.
No Negro League baseball player was even considered for the Baseball Hall of Fame until 1971. What they called a Special Committee on the Negro Leagues was formed in that year. It was only formed to select one or two former Negro League players to the Baseball Hall of Fame until their, quote, mission was complete. I don't know what they had in mind for their mission, but it's a little sad. So their mission started in 1971. The first and only player in 1971 to be inducted from the Negro Leagues was Satchel Paige. He was a pitcher.
Which, if you're only inducting one, Satchel Paige
probably the one
is the way to go. But it's ridiculous that they did that.
Just him.
But yeah, I'll let you get a couple more into this so that you can, so people at home can kind of hear how silly this is.
So from this committee, Satchel Paige was inducted in 1971. Josh Gibson and Buck Leonard in 1972. Monty Irvin, 1973. Cool Papa Bell, 1974. Judy Johnson, 1975. Oscar Charleston, 1976. Pop Lloyd in 1976. And Martin DeHigo in 1977. And that was it. That committee was disbanded in 1977, and for all intents and purposes at that time, that was it.
All right, and so here's the thing that grates on my nerves a little bit about this situation. The Baseball Hall of Fame is the National Baseball Hall of Fame. It is not the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. So players, contributors, managers that are in baseball, period, should be honored in the Baseball Hall of Fame. And at the very least, a class of Satchel Paige, Josh Gibson, and Buck Leonard should have gone in together first ballot. I mean, that is a class to rival any class from Major League Baseball that went in together. I mean, it just is. And so the fact that they had to wait, first of all, until 1971 to be inducted is ridiculous. And then they have to go in one at a time. Like, it's just reeks of like tokenism and how stupid that is. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. If a player's good enough to be in the Hall of Fame, they're good enough to be in the Hall of Fame. And if they're not, then they're not. but clearly these 10 dudes were. So what's the deal?
Yeah, it like you said, I think grates on my nerves is a great way to put it, because like you said, any great baseball player should be honored. It's not the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. Anyone who contributed to the sport, especially in the way that they did in their time, should have been honored long ago, long before they were. It did come back at some point. This special committee on the Negro Leagues that was disbanded in 1977, their powers, whatever power they have to only induct one person a year, their powers were given to the Veterans Committee, who then only selected 2 Negro League baseball players, Rube Foster in 1981 and Ray Dandridge in 1987. They only chose those 2 over almost a 20-year span. Only 2 more. So what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Only 9 were inducted over 8 years originally. That committee was disbanded. Another committee only chose 2 over the next 20 years. And then from 1995 to 2001, the Veterans Committee was given a mandate to elect 1 Negro League player per year. Again, only 1. They decided on Leon Day in 1995, Bill Foster 1996, Willie Wells 1997, Bullet Joe Rogan 1998, Smokey Joe Williams 1999, Turkey Stearns in 2000, and Hilton Smith in 2001. Wow.
I mean, the Veterans Committee could have done more in the 14 years between the second, round of this and when they were given this mandate. And then it keeps going to show you how many players are truly Hall of Fame worthy from the Negro Leagues. This process continued as we move forward in history.
But wait, while it's still not enough, there's more. In 2001, the Baseball Hall of Fame, not the Major League Baseball Hall, the Baseball Hall of Fame, they received a grant from Major League Baseball. Their goal was to study Negro League baseball before 1960, and then another special committee on the Negro Leagues was formed. So this is in 2001. They started with an initial pool of 94 potential candidates, Negro League baseball players, executives, and so forth, to potentially go into the Baseball Hall of Fame. That list of 94 was reduced to 39 before voting day. And then on February 27, 2006, a 12-person committee met and only selected 17 more people. I'm going to read their names. Ray Brown, Willard Brown, Andy Cooper, Biz Mackey, Mule Suttles, Cristobal Torriente, Judd Wilson, Frank Grant, Pete Hill, Jose Mendez, Luis Santop, Ben Taylor, Effa Manley, Alex Pompez, Cumberland Posey, J.L. Wilkinson, and Sol White. To this day, that's it.
All right, and so I intentionally didn't say anything about this because you remember a couple of minutes ago we were talking about how Mule Suttles is in who was it? Holway wrote the book about Negro League baseball and tried to compile all the statistics. And so Mule Suttles is who he put as the all-time leading home run hitter in the Negro Leagues. And so we go from 1971 to 2006.
2006.
Before we get Mule Suttles into the Hall of Fame, which is why I think it's fair to say that some of this is ridiculous because your leading home run hitter can't get in for, 35 years after you start letting these players in.
Right.
And, forever, 70 years from the time he played. And it's just mind-blowing how the world handled some of these situations. I mean,
just to get to the 2006 vote, we went through one special committee on the Negro Leagues, disbanded. Veterans Committee, stopped. Baseball Hall of Fame had to get a grant from Major League Baseball to get a second special committee on the Negro Leagues. Started with a list of 94, only elected 17. There's no way this should be a comprehensive list of Negro League baseball players in the Hall of Fame. No way. And I'm no expert. I've done the research for this episode, and I've looked into it a good amount, and I've watched baseball my whole life, and there is no way, absolutely no way, that these are the only Hall of Fame worthy. And I know the Baseball Writers Association today, forgive my words, can be a bunch of pricks about putting people into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
But come on, people.
It's just a long-standing thing, like so many of our long-standing things in society that have to continue to be worked on. From a logical standpoint, it's silly. A lot of this is silly. The true tragedy of it all is that while these guys were all living and while they were in their primes, they didn't get the opportunity to play ones versus ones, best versus best. They didn't get the opportunity to do that. And so, for every discussion where Josh Gibson comes up and you talk about how strong of a power hitter he is, you compare him to Babe Ruth because they're contemporaries. And somebody's going to say that Josh Gibson didn't face major league pitching. And the rebuttal is always, because they're contemporaries, Babe Ruth never faced Satchel Paige and other Negro League pitchers. So, like, the one versus one situation never happens, in part because the commissioner of baseball, through this entire period that we've been discussing, didn't allow it. Not only did he not allow it he did not allow it, but he actively encouraged teams to not sign black players. He did prohibit them from playing Negro League teams. So we don't even get Yankees versus Grays as just a fun exhibition series to see what would happen. And that's the worst part of this, is that, and it's how this always happens, by excluding head-to-head competition or by excluding interaction, you create the argument that one player is better than the other because they're in better situations, and you can't be proven wrong. And that's why people do it, and it sucks because we're having to tell people how good Josh Gibson was instead of them just knowing on their own.
Yeah, it is unfortunate that we have to spend an hour talking about it for the people that are going to listen to just know who he is versus him being a name like Babe Ruth. You would think of the great baseball players. We alluded to it earlier. You only think about major league players. And for many different reasons, that's the case. We understand those reasons. But you need to know who these people are because they deserve as much recognition as anybody does. One of my favorite quotes from a person who played with Gibson, they were quoted as saying, quote, "If Josh Gibson had been in the big leagues in his prime, Babe Ruth and Hank Aaron would still be chasing him for the home run record." That's probably true. I mean, I lean towards him not having a problem hitting, especially if it's different when you only face a major league pitcher once every 3 years, right? Like like the exhibition games, like what we're talking about when they barnstormed and played random people. It's different when you only get to face them once every once in a while. If he had gotten used to it, I mean, as good as he was, there's no way he couldn't have been just as good, if not better.
Yeah, and there are also quotes, just want to throw this in, that from Walter Johnson, famous career, like, great pitcher, where he says things like, he's talking about Gibson, and he says, "There's a catcher that any big league club would like to buy for $200,000. His name is Gibson. He can do everything. Hits the ball a mile, catches smooth as day," right? Like, this is Walter Johnson. He is a Major League Baseball pitcher. He knows what he's talking about, and he's giving this guy he's just pumping him up.
So after all that, we wanted to let you all know that the Josh Gibson Foundation is a thing. Their mission statement says, the Josh Gibson Foundation believes in the endless possibilities for potential in today's youth. By providing academic and athletic programs that foster leadership and scholarship, the skills necessary for tomorrow's successes are created today. They have a whole website, joshgibson.org. They've got programs. They put on events. They do all sorts of great things. For the baseball community, for youth baseball. Go check it out. They have a donate link, all kinds of stuff. They're doing great things. I think Andrew McCutcheon is currently featured on the website right now. He's got a video on there for the 2020 Negro League Centennial Celebration. So if you find it in your heart, go take a look at it. Support them. They're doing great things. I'm sure they won't. I'm sure they'll love the support. If anybody from that hears this, we would love that. You can find us on social media and stuff. We would love to learn more about it. We'll do everything we can to help. So that is the story of Josh Gibson. So after all that, do you think they could do any more for Negro League baseball today? I mean, they neglected it for so long. What is there anything that could even be done today to fully reconcile all the time that was lost?
It's one of those situations where like, what can you do? I mean, once you've made the mistake, you just got to try to rectify it. And people that think it wasn't a mistake in the first place think you're doing it too hard and you're trying to like virtue signal or whatever the fancy term for that is. And then, the people that were affected in the first place just kind of look at you and you're like, okay, I'm glad you're finally doing something, but it's 50 years too late. So, what does this even mean? So it's hard to know what you can do to make things right. Featuring these players in things the way that, just thinking about the video game, MLB The Show. You can play game modes where you play with Babe Ruth and Mickey Mantle and Lou Gehrig, and not necessarily Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige are always featured in those game modes. So I think little things like that could be done to push forward for recognition and understanding, talking about it more than just at a particular Jackie Robinson Day or a particular time of year where you honor the Negro Leagues. Just making it be a bigger part of the conversation in general would help too. But, it's one of those things where maybe there's not a right answer on how to fix it, how to make it right. There's
not going to be a perfect way. There's never going to be a perfect way to, you can't erase history, of course. And people try and you can't. All you can do is give them the due that they deserve, right? And that's what we wanted to do with this episode. We wanted to tell you the story of potentially, in my eyes anyway, definitely one of the greatest power hitters baseball has ever seen. Doesn't matter what team he played on, doesn't matter what jersey he played for, doesn't matter where he came from, doesn't matter where he went after he was done. Josh Gibson should be in the Hall of Fame as he is. He should have gotten there a lot earlier. It is a shame that it took so long. It's a shame that they still seem to be reluctant. And they're way past their time, right? What do you have in Major League Baseball? You got 5 years until you're eligible, and then you got 10 after that before you're ineligible again. There's got to be something they can do to give more of these players their due. Because again, that list we gave you at the end is in no way all inclusive of the players that should be in there. So, Major League Baseball, listen to our podcast, take our advice. That is what you don't know about Josh Gibson. We will see you next time. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to this episode of What You Don't Know About Sports. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please leave us a review, 5 stars only, and hit that subscribe button wherever you listen. If you have a great sports story, we want to hear about it. You can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WYDKAS Podcast, and on our YouTube channel at What You Don't Know About Sports Podcast. All episodes are written, recorded, and edited by us. Stay tuned for the next episode. Trying to make an educated sports public here. You people are making it really hard.
Just hit play.